Elias has his ghosts. Lena, Ben, the ones he carries from the Westgate Tower. For the longest time, I thought I understood them. I listened to his story and I felt the weight of it. I thought that by understanding his pain, I was ready for my own. I was a fool. You don't get to borrow someone else's scars to make yourself stronger. You have to earn your own. You have to bleed for them. Elias's story taught me the why. Why we fight, why we endure. But it didn't teach me the how. It didn't teach me the feeling of the silence after you give an order, knowing it might be the last thing someone ever hears. It didn't teach me the taste of failure. I learned that 3 months ago, on a mountain cloaked in ice, in a place we called the Whisper House. Tea started with a signal, or rather, the end of one. For years, the Fireflies had a handful of automated relay stations, bouncing messages between sectors. It was a fragile network, but it was ours. It was how we knew we weren't alone. And then, one by one, they started going dark. The last one to fall was Relay Station Thebes, high in the Cascade Mountains. Without it, our entire West Coast operation was flying blind. The mission wasn't just to fix it. The old tech was failing. The plan was to replace its core guidance system with salvage tech from a pre-outbreak military drone that had crashed somewhere on the same mountain. It was a salvage op. My first command. Elias was the one who advocated for me. He told the council that we needed leaders who still believed in a future, not just those who remembered the past. He didn't say it to me, but I knew what he meant. He was giving me the chance to be more than just a listener to old stories. He was giving me a chance to write my own. My team was small, just 3 of us. There was Eva, a few years older than me, cynical and sharp. She was a scavenger from the Seattle QZ, and she didn't trust anyone who hadn't starved with her. She looked at me and saw a kid playing soldier. And there was Leo. He was barely 17. Green, eager and terrified. He looked at me like I was the answer to every prayer he'd ever had. He was my Ben, and that thought scared me more than anything. The climb took 2 days. The air grew thin and cold. The snow deadened the sound, wrapping us in a thick, white silence. Eva was quiet, but her silence was loud. She'd second-guessed my route, the pace I set, the way I told Leo to pack his gear. She wasn't being insubordinate, not quite. She was testing me, waiting for me to fail. Leo, on the other hand, tried too hard. He was always watching me, trying to anticipate my orders. He wanted so badly to do the right thing. I saw myself in his eagerness, that wildfire hope Elias talked about. And I felt a fierce, terrifying need to protect it, to get him home safe. We found the drone on the second day. It was wedged in a ravine, a skeletal wreck of military hardware. But its guidance module, the prize, was intact. It was heavy, awkward. Getting it was the easy part. The hard part was getting it to the relay station, another 5 miles up the mountain with a storm rolling in. The wind was picking up, howling through the pines. Eva wanted to find shelter, to wait it out. We push on, I told her. The storm will give us cover. No patrols, Fedra or otherwise, will be out in this. She just stared at me. And what about the things that don't care about the cold? She asked. I didn't have an answer for that. I just knew the mission. Get the gear to the relay. I gave the order. We pushed on. We called it the Whisper House. Relay Station Thebes. It was a concrete bunker, half buried in the snow. Its massive satellite dish pointed at the sky like a frozen skeleton. The storm was a full-blown blizzard now. We barely made it inside, dragging the heavy module with us. The place was dead. No power. The air was colder inside than out. And it was quiet. Too quiet. Just like Elias's story. A silence that feels like it's listening. The relay equipment was on the main floor. The lower level was a maze of maintenance tunnels and server rooms. We got to work, trying to integrate the new module. It was slow, freezing work. My fingers were numb. That's when Leo heard it first. A sound that wasn't the wind. A soft scratching sound. Like rats, but heavier. It seemed to come from inside the walls. Then I heard it too. A faint, wet, whispering sound. Eva scoffed. "It's the wind playing tricks in the vents," she said. But she held her shotgun a little tighter. We knew what clickers sounded like. The groans of runners. This was different. This was stealthy. Predatory. I ordered a perimeter check. Leo would stay with the gear. I'd take the main floor. Eva would clear the lower level. She didn't argue this time. She just nodded, her face grim. That was the last time I saw her alive. I heard the scream over the howl of the wind. It wasn't loud. It was sharp, and it was cut off quick. I ran for the stairwell, my heart hammering against my ribs. Halfway down, I saw her shotgun lying on the floor. And then I saw them. Stalkers. I'd only ever read about them in manuals. The second stage of infection after runner, but before clicker. They were fast, cunning. They don't just charge you. They watch you. They learn. They hide in the shadows on the walls, and they wait. Their faces were just beginning to split with the fungus, but their eyes were still there. And they were full of a terrifying, intelligent malice. There were 3 of them, crouched over what was left of Eva. They turned their heads in unison, their movements jerky and inhuman. They didn't shriek. They just hissed. That whispering sound. I didn't think. I just fired. I emptied my clip, driving them back into the maze of tunnels. I didn't kill any of them. I just scared them off. For a moment, I ran back to the main floor. Leo was white as a sheet, holding his rifle with trembling hands. "What was that?" he whispered. "Eva's gone," I told him. "And we're not alone." The whispers started again. From all around us. They were in the vents, in the crawl spaces, in the walls. They were hunting us. The Whisper House belonged to them. We were trapped. The blizzard was raging outside, and the stalkers were everywhere inside. The module, our prize, our reason for being there, sat on the floor between us. A cold, heavy anchor. I thought of Elias. I thought of Lena making her choice. A sacrifice to save the mission. I looked at the module. Then I looked at the terror in Leo's eyes. And I felt a cold dread wash over me. I wasn't Lena. And this wasn't her story. For hours, we played their game. A terrifying game of cat and mouse. A shadow moving in a corner. A whisper from a dark doorway. They were testing us, probing our defenses. I knew it was only a matter of time before they rushed us. My mind was racing. The mission was the module. Without it, the Fireflies on the coast were deaf and dumb. But the module was a death sentence. It was too heavy. We couldn't fight and carry it. I could hear Elias's voice in my head, telling his story. Make it count. There are 2 kinds of quiet. There's the quiet of the snow-covered mountain, the silence that listens back. And then there's the quiet of the camp after a loss. It's a heavy, hollow thing. You see it in the way people look at you. They don't see Maya anymore. They see the commander who came back with 1 less soldier. They see a ghost at your shoulder. Eva's ghost. Elias told me I made a leader's choice. But leadership feels a lot like a wound that never heals. Leo, he survived, but the fire in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep-set caution. He'd flinch at shadows. He'd wake up shouting from nightmares of whispers in the walls. I brought him back, but I left his innocence on that mountain. It's another weight I carry. For weeks, my victory, the few salvaged memory boards from the relay station, felt like a mockery. They sat on our tech bench, a monument to my failure. Our tech head, a man named Reese who could make a radio out of rust and hope, thought they were useless, fried by the power surge I'd created. He was wrong. They weren't fried. They were locked. And the ghost in the machine had one last secret to give. It took Reese a month to bypass the military-grade encryption. The data wasn't Firefly correspondence. It was older, darker, a ghost from the world before. The files were labeled Project Chimera. It wasn't a weapon. It was a fallout plan, a government continuity project, a deep-range, self-sustaining bunker built to withstand the apocalypse and reboot civilization. A modern-day Noah's Ark, buried under a mountain 1,000 miles east. According to the files, It was stocked with everything: a global seed vault, a full medical fabrication unit, a digital library containing all human knowledge. It was the dream we were fighting for, already built and waiting. But there was a catch. The files contained a one-time entry sequence, a digital key, and it was set to expire. We had a window of 3 weeks to get there, or the door would be sealed forever. The council debated for 2 days straight. The arguments were fierce. It was too far, too risky. It had to be a trap, a forgotten Fedra honeypot. But Elias, he saw it differently. He argued it was the only move on the board, a chance, however slim, to leapfrog a generation of struggle. Then he looked at me, and he nominated me to lead the expedition. I could feel the eyes of the council on me. The girl who lost a soldier on a simple salvage op Elias's voice cut through the silence. He said I had proven I could make the hard call, that I understood the difference between the mission and the people, that my pragmatism, born in the Whisper House, was more valuable now than anyone else's idealism. I agreed, but on my terms. I would choose the team. 3 people, no more. I chose Leo. The council balked. He was too young, they said, too shaken from the last mission. But I needed to prove to him and to myself that we could still move forward, that his survival wasn't the end of his story. For my third, I walked over to the quiet corner of the camp where the old Fedra soldier, Marcus, spent his days. The man Elias had told me about, the ghost of Westgate. He was our only living link to the world that built the bunker. I asked him to be our advisor, to help us navigate the mind of the military that had locked itself away. He looked at me with those old, tired eyes, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he looked like a soldier again. He said yes, a traumatized kid, a haunted old soldier, and a commander who was terrified she was leading them all to their deaths. This was our team. This was our last, best hope. The journey east was a long, quiet prayer. 1,000 miles of bad road and worse memories. Every abandoned town, every rusted car, was a tombstone for the world that had built our destination. Marcus was invaluable. He knew the old protocols, the old ways of thinking. He taught us how to spot 25-year-old military tripwires, how to read the faded signs of troop movements. He and Leo formed a strange bond, the old soldier and the young one. 2 men trying to find their footing in a world that had tried to break them. We found the bunker exactly where the files said it would be. There was no sign on the surface, just a small, concrete maintenance hatch disguised as a geological survey marker. We descended into the earth and found ourselves before a blast door. A solid wall of steel and concrete, 100 feet thick. It was humbling, terrifying. I entered the code. For a long moment, nothing happened. I thought I had led us all this way for nothing. Then, a low groan echoed through the tunnel. With a deafening hiss of hydraulics that hadn't been used in a generation, the great door began to open. The air that hit us didn't smell of dust or decay. It smelled clean, filtered, like a hospital. We walked into a world preserved in amber. The light was white and steady. The floors were polished. There were no spores, no bloodstains, no ghosts. We were met by 4 figures in clean, white jumpsuits, holding weapons I didn't recognize. They weren't soldiers. They moved with a calm, unnerving efficiency. Their leader stepped forward, a woman in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of absolute authority. She introduced herself as Dr. Eris Thorne, Director of Continuity. She knew who we were, or rather what we were, surface dwellers. She called us transients. She led us through her world, her concrete garden. They had hydroponic farms growing foods I'd only ever seen in old world picture books. They had a med bay that could synthesize any medicine. They had children, born and raised in the bunker, who had never seen the sun. They had preserved civilization. Eris explained their purpose. They were the continuity. They had monitored the surface for 25 years, watching the plagues, the wars, the rise of the infected. They had deemed the surface a failed experiment. Their mission was no longer to reboot the world, but to outlive it. To be the sole inheritors of a clean earth, once the fever of humanity outside had finally burned itself out. She looked at us, at our worn clothes and scarred hands, with a look of detached pity. She saw the Fireflies as no better than Fedra, two dying factions fighting over scraps. Then she made her offer. The one-time code we used was a fail-safe, a final call for any high-level government or military personnel who might have survived. As their descendants, she was obligated to honor it. We could stay, all three of us. We would be given food, shelter, safety, a future, but we would have to leave our world, our cause behind. The door would be sealed, forever. I saw the look in Leo's eyes. He was mesmerized by the clean rooms, the promise of a life without fear. I saw Marcus look at the order, the structure. The ghost of his Fedra past was tempted by this perfect, sterile peace. This was the light at the end of the tunnel, but it felt cold. It felt wrong. That night, Eris gave me a tour of their archives, the digital library. She showed me history, science, art, everything that was lost. It was a king's ransom. And then I saw it. The section on civic governance. I saw their protocols, their societal blueprints. It wasn't a democracy. It was a caste system. Every citizen was assigned a role at birth based on genetic profiling. Their population was strictly controlled. Those who showed aberrant social tendencies, dissent, creativity that fell outside their norms, were reconditioned. Their minds wiped and repurposed for menial tasks. It wasn't a garden. It was a gilded cage. They hadn't saved civilization. They had curated it, sterilized it, stripped it of its soul. They had looked for the light and decided to build a wall around it, letting the rest of the world go dark. That wasn't hope. It was cowardice. I knew we couldn't stay, and I knew we couldn't leave empty-handed. I went to my team. I told them what I'd found. The temptation in their eyes died, replaced by a cold understanding. My new mission was clear. Not diplomacy, not negotiation, theft. We couldn't take their food or their medicine, but we could take their knowledge, the data from their global seed vault, the agricultural science to fight the blights that were devastating our own crops, and their full medical library, a blueprint for a future. That was a prize worth dying for. The heist was a whisper in a silent world. Marcus used his knowledge of old world security to get us into the server room. Leo, fast and quiet, was our lookout. I was the mule, interfacing with their system, downloading terabytes of data onto encrypted drives. But you can't steal from a perfect system without leaving a flaw. An alarm tripped. Not a loud one, just a quiet chime in a control room somewhere. We had minutes. We fought our way out, not against monsters, but against clean, efficient security guards who were just protecting their home. It was messier, harder. There's no righteousness in shooting a man who thinks he's fighting for paradise. We made it to the blast door just as the lockdown sequence began. Red lights flashed. The great door began to groan shut for the last time. We slipped through the gap with seconds to spare, sealing the last remnant of the old world behind us forever. We had the data, and we had made a new enemy, one that, for now, couldn't reach us. When we returned, we didn't bring back a miracle weapon or a hidden army. We brought back something better, a chance, not just to survive, but to build. I stood with Elias as the sun set, watching Reese work to decrypt the first of the drives. You were right, I told him. It was a leader's choice. He just looked at me. Which one, he asked. All of them, I said. I finally understand. My whole life. I thought being a Firefly meant looking for the light. That we'd find some forgotten beacon. Some perfect ideal left over from the world before, and it would save us. But the light isn't something you find. It's something you build. You gather the embers, a scared kid, a broken soldier, a piece of a story, a drive full of stolen knowledge. You protect them, you nurture them, and you build a new fire. Not as bright as the old one, maybe, But it's real, and it's ours. My hands are not clean. My ghosts are not quiet. But my story isn't about the past anymore. It's about what we do tomorrow. There's a ledger, not for supplies or ammunition. It's one I keep in my head. A ledger of costs. Every mission has an entry. Whisper House. The cost, Eva's life. Leo's innocence. The gain, a handful of memory boards. A fair trade? The ledger doesn't say. It only records the price. Yesterday, I made the biggest entry yet. The Chimera Protocol. The cost, a sealed tomb of a world we can never return to, and the burning hatred of the ghosts inside. The gain, a key to a future I can't even begin to imagine. I should feel victorious. I feel heavy. The data drives are in Reese's hands now. The camp is buzzing with a hope so bright it hurts to look at. They're calling it the Phoenix Protocol, a new beginning from the ashes. It's a good name, a good story, but the ledger whispers a different story. It tells me that the price of this new world hasn't been paid yet. We only just put down the deposit. The 6 months that followed were a blur of frantic creation. The Phoenix Protocol wasn't just data, it was a miracle. Our first harvest was a feast. We synthesized medicines that could stop infections in hours. The crying of newborns, once the sound of fear, became a sound of promise. But miracles are heavy. They draw moths to the flame. Our population tripled. Every face was a new mouth to feed, a new story of loss. Every night, the ledger in my head grew longer. More people meant more problems. Factions formed. The old-timers versus the newcomers. Those who still dreamed of war versus those who were just tired of running. And then there was Kale. He was a good soldier. Strong. Charismatic. He saw our growing strength, our stockpiles of food and medicine, and saw only one thing: fuel for the fire. He saw a weapon. While I was planning crop rotations, he was planning troop movements. He'd walk through the greenhouses, and his hand would rest on his pistol, like he couldn't comprehend a victory that didn't come from the barrel of a gun. He called my work playing house. He said I was forgetting what a Firefly was. I told him we were redefining it. He didn't listen. The arguments started in the council tent, then they spilled out into the open. The camp was dividing right down the middle. I remember the day he went against my orders. A direct command to stand down, to not engage a local federal patrol. He saw weakness. He took his loyalists on a retaliatory strike. He thought he was proving a point. He got his people slaughtered. I listened to the panic calls on the radio, my hands shaking not with fear, but with a cold, hollow rage. He had thrown away lives for his pride. I had to lead the rescue. I had to go out into the dark and pull his people from the fire he had started. We saved most of them. My strategy worked. My team performed flawlessly. But as we carried our wounded back through the gates, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a zookeeper. I had proven I could win the battle, but I was losing the war for what this place was supposed to be. The ledger entry for that night was bitter. Cost, 6 good soldiers. Gain, a lesson in the arrogance of men. I looked at Kale's face, shamed but still defiant, and I knew this was just the beginning. The fight with Kale blinded me to the real threat. While we were fighting amongst ourselves, the ghosts we'd robbed had found us. The continuity. It started with Leo's patrols reporting strange sightings, trails that disappeared, sounds that didn't belong. Then the drone came. It didn't attack. It just watched, an eye in the sky, belonging to another world. Then came the message. It wasn't a crackle over a radio. It was a projection beamed from a drone that landed in the field outside our walls. It was her, Dr. Eris Thorne. Her face, calm and severe, hung in the air like a specter. Her voice was cold as a sterile scalpel. She called our community a biological contagion. She said our use of her technology was an unacceptable perversion. She gave us her ultimatum: abandon the Phoenix Protocol, destroy the harvest, disperse the population, or she would sterilize the valley. She had a weapon of blight, a genetically engineered plague that would kill every plant for 50 miles in every direction. She would watch us starve. A quiet, tidy apocalypse delivered from on high. The camp panicked. The fragile peace I had built shattered. Kale used the fear to his advantage, his voice ringing through the camp. This is what peace gets us. An execution order. We should have taken the fight to Fedra. We should be a fist, not a farm. He was wrong, but he wasn't stupid. We were trapped. The local Fedra commander, Valerius, was strangling us from the outside. And now, a silent god in the sky was threatening to unmake our world. Our only advantage came from a mistake. A Fedra patrol saw one of the drones and shot it down, thinking it was ours. We captured the wreckage and the pilot. His name was Orion. He was just a boy younger than Leo. He looked at me with pure, undiluted hatred. He called me a savage, a thief. Elias helped me talk to him. For days, we just listened. We let him rail against us. Then, slowly, we showed him our world. We showed him the babies his medicine had saved. We showed him Marcus, an old Fedra soldier, teaching children how to read. We showed him Leo, a boy his age who had seen real monsters and still found the courage to stand guard. I saw the first crack in his faith, the first glimmer of doubt, and in that crack I saw a path, a terrible, dangerous path. I couldn't fight two wars at once. I had to choose my enemy. I made a call. I opened a secret channel to the devil I knew, Commander Valerius. It was the greatest betrayal of the Firefly ideal I could imagine. I offered him a deal, our advanced medical supplies for his starving, sick soldiers. In exchange, I wanted a temporary truce, and I wanted his intelligence on the continuity. The meeting took place in a ruined church, halfway between our territories. It was just me and him, two commanders walking a tightrope over an abyss. He was a monster, but he was a predictable monster. He understood the math of survival. He agreed. Hale saw it as treason. My own people whispered that I had lost my way. Maybe I had, but the devil's handshake, as we called it, gave us breathing room. It gave us a chance. We planned to join up, a surgical strike to blind the watchers in the sky. It was a masterpiece of strategy, designed by Elias and Marcus, but it was built on a foundation of lies and mistrust. It fell apart. Kale, unable to stomach fighting alongside Fedra, sabotaged part of the mission. The betrayal shattered the alliance. Valerius's people died. Our people died. We accomplished the mission. The sky was blind, for now, but the cost was immense. I returned with the blood of both factions on my hands, with no allies left, and two enemies now bent on my total destruction. The ledger was overflowing with red. The end came faster than I thought. Orion, our prisoner-turned-ally, helped us decode the last of the drone's data. The blight was real, and it was coming, in 1 week. At the same time, Valerius was gathering every soldier he had for one final, cleansing assault. The vice was closing. There was only one path. Not defense, not escape. One single, impossible, suicidal charge. Straight into the heart of the beast. Straight back to the continuity bunker. The final days were a fever dream. Kale, finally seeing the abyss we were all facing, stood with me. His militarists and my builders became one force. One spear, aimed at the heart of the mountain. I remember the faces of those who volunteered. I remember Leo, no longer a boy, checking his gear with steady hands. I remember Marcus, polishing his old rifle, a strange peace on his face. And I remember Elias, looking at me with a sad, proud smile. The battle was a whirlwind of fire and blood. We used the Fedra assault as our cover, punching a hole through their lines and racing for the bunker. I remember Leo's desperate defense of our rear flank. I remember Marcus falling, a quiet end for a soldier who had survived 2 worlds, his hand steady as he disabled the last of the bunker's automated turrets. I remember Kale in the Blight control room, a defiant grin on his face as he overloaded the system, consuming himself in a firestorm of righteous fury, a warrior finding the ending he always wanted. And I remember standing before Dr. Thorne in her sterile command center as the world burned outside. There were no weapons between us, just two ideologies at the end of all things. She called me a harbinger of chaos. I told her chaos was just another word for freedom. As we argued, Elias played our last card. He broadcast the entire Phoenix Protocol. All of it. The medical files, the agricultural data. He gave our greatest secret away, freely, to anyone in the world with a radio. He bankrupted our advantage for a chance at a real future for everyone. That was his final entry in the ledger. I didn't kill Eris. I just broke her world. I opened her bunker, her perfect, sterile cage, and I offered her people a choice. Stay in the tomb or walk out into the messy, painful, beautiful sun. That was years ago. The ledger is closed now. Elias is gone. So are Marcus and Kale and so many others. Their names are carved on a memorial wall at the center of town. This place, the Confluence, it's not the world the Fireflies dreamed of. It's not the perfect world Eris Thorne wanted. It's just ours. It's loud and it's messy. People still argue. People still struggle. But they're building. They're living. I learned the final lesson of leadership. It's not about winning. It's not about being right. It's about carrying the cost, about shouldering the weight of the ledger, so that the next generation can write their own story on a clean page. My war is over. The real work, the work of living, of building something that will last, that has just begun. And for the first time in a long time, the future feels heavier than the past. And I think that's what hope is.
My aunt, Maya, taught me that every story has a cost. A price paid in blood, or grief, or innocence. Her life was a ledger of those costs, a long accounting of what it took to build this place, the Confluence. For 20 years after the wars, after the founding, we lived in the world she built. We called it the Long Peace. Peace is a strange thing. It's quieter than you think. It's the sound of children laughing instead of watchmen shouting. It's the smell of wet earth in the greenhouses instead of smoke on the wind. It's the luxury of worrying about tomorrow's weather instead of tomorrow's raid. Maya gave us that. She led us not with a crown, but with a quiet strength that was heavier than any throne. But the ledger always comes due, even for legends. She didn't fall in battle. No monster from the old world claimed her. It was a sickness in her lungs, a whisper of a scar from some long-forgotten fight that finally festered. I was her doctor. I sat by her bed, holding all the knowledge of the Phoenix Protocol in my hands, and I was powerless. The great architect of our future was brought down by a flaw in the foundation. I remember the last thing she said to me. Her voice was a dry rasp, but her eyes were still clear. She looked past me, out the window, at the thriving town. "The fight isn't to win, Anya," she whispered. "It's to build. Just keep building." A week later, she was gone, and the council, in its wisdom and its grief, looked to me. Her niece, her student, her doctor. They asked me to take her place. I told them I was a healer, not a leader. Elias, ancient and frail now, put a hand on my shoulder. He said, "Sometimes they are the same thing." I accepted, and I felt the weight of her shadow fall over me. I walked in her footsteps, terrified I would never be able to fill them. I didn't know that my test wouldn't be one of war or politics. I didn't know that the end of the long peace would begin not with a gunshot, but with a cough. It started in the lower town, down by the river. A dry, persistent cough. Then came the fever. Then, the fluid in the lungs. We called it the dust lung. It was slow, insidious. Our broad-spectrum antibiotics, the miracle drugs from the bunker's data, were useless against it. It wasn't a bacteria. It wasn't a virus we could identify. Within 2 months, we had lost a dozen people. The young and the old were the most vulnerable. The peace we had known for 2 decades began to fray. Fear is a weed that grows in the quietest gardens. People started eyeing their neighbors. Old factions began to whisper in the shadows. The community Maya had stitched together with her own blood and hope was threatening to unravel. I buried myself in the lab. I worked until my eyes burned, analyzing tissue samples, blood cultures, everything. The pattern was there, I knew it was. And then I saw it. The contamination levels in the patient's blood. They were off the charts. Not with a pathogen, but with a complex, synthetic chemical chain. A poison. A slow, invisible poison. And everyone who was sick drew their water from the same source. The river. The very lifeblood of our community was killing us. The mission was clear. It wasn't a military strike. It was a scientific expedition. I had to go upstream. I had to find the source. The council argued. It was too dangerous. They wanted to send a security team, led by fighters. But I was the only one who would know what to look for. This was my fight. My responsibility. I chose a small team. Not warriors. Specialists. A geologist named Ben, who knew the mountains better than anyone. An engineer named Kara, who could analyze water and soil on the fly. And for security, I asked Leo. Leo. He was in his late 30s now, the head of security. The boy who survived the Whisper House was now a man, his face a roadmap of hard-won peace. He rarely spoke of my aunt, but his loyalty to her memory was absolute. When I asked him to come, he just nodded. "I'll keep you safe," he said. It was a promise not just to me, but to the ghost between us. We traveled for a week, following the river into the heart of the mountains. The world outside the confluence was still wild. We bypassed pockets of infected, navigated treacherous terrain. It was on the 8th day that Ben found it. A landslide, maybe a decade old, had uncovered something that wasn't supposed to be there. The concrete shell of a building, half buried in the mountainside. The logo on the faded sign was of a pre-outbreak corporation, and the name of the facility was Project Clearwater. The lab was a tomb, a monument to the old world's arrogance. We found their records. Project Clearwater wasn't about clean water. It was about creating industrial solvents, hyper-aggressive chemical agents for mining and manufacturing. And they had an accident. A containment breach, just before the bombs fell. A highly toxic neurocorrosive compound had been leaking from its containment tank for 25 years, seeping slowly into the groundwater, into the mountain, into our river. The landslide had accelerated it. The poison was now flowing freely. My heart sank. But then, we found their research. They knew they had created a monster, and they had been trying to design a neutralizing agent. The formula was there, on their central server, but it was incomplete. The world ended before they could finish. As Kara worked to access the data, the whole facility shuddered. The emergency power, running on a small, decaying reactor for a quarter of a century, was finally failing. Alarms, faint and dying, began to chime. The reactor was going critical. A meltdown would rupture the primary containment tank completely, releasing the full, unmitigated tonnage of the poison into the river. It would not just kill our community. It would render the entire valley uninhabitable for centuries. We had a choice. A terrible, impossible choice. We had minutes until meltdown. The full data download of the partial formula would take hours. We could try to get the data, or we could stop the meltdown. We couldn't do both. Leo was yelling at me to make a call. To get out. My mind raced. I saw Maya's face. I heard her voice. Just keep building. You can't build on poisoned ground. I looked at the incomplete formula on the screen. It was a complex protein chain, elegant and deadly. I couldn't save it all. But maybe I didn't need to. I have my aunt's eyes. But I have my mother's memory. She was a botanist. She taught me to memorize the patterns of leaves, the structures of flowers. My mind sees patterns. I stared at the formula, burning it into my memory. The core structure, the bonding agents, the catalyst sequences. I barked orders at my team. Kara, get physical samples of the toxin itself. Ben, grab every research note you can find. Leo, get us a path out. I grabbed a sample of the partial neutralizer they had managed to synthesize. And then I gave the final order. Flood the reactor chamber. Now. Leo looked at me, his eyes wide. Anya, the data. The data is in here, I said, tapping my head. The rest is just noise. Do it. He nodded. We ran as he triggered the emergency shutdown, a cascade of rushing water that would drown the reactor and the servers with it. We escaped the tomb just as it sealed itself in a torrent of cooling water and mud. We had survived. But I had just made a wild, arrogant gamble with the lives of everyone I had ever known. We returned not with a cure, but with an echo of one. A puzzle with most of the pieces missing. For the past month, this lab has been my world. We have been working non-stop, trying to rebuild the formula from the fragments I carried back in my head and the samples we salvaged. Every failure means another name carved on the memorial wall. Last night, I thought we had hit a dead end. The protein chain wouldn't bond. It was unstable. I was ready to give up. I sat alone in the quiet, the weight of 1,000 lives on my shoulders. I felt Maya's shadow over me, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a shield. I wasn't her. I didn't have her strength, her certainty. But she told me to build. And builders don't always follow the blueprints. Sometimes they have to improvise. I went back to the formula. I saw the flaw. The original researchers were trying to destroy the toxin. What if that was wrong? What if you just had to change it? Make it inert? I'm looking through the microscope now. At a single drop of poisoned water. I'm adding the new compound, the one born from my desperate guess. The timer on the wall clicks past another hour. Another life hanging in the balance. I watch. The toxic chain shudders. It resists. And then, it breaks. Not into nothing, but into new harmless proteins. It's working. My God, it's working. I finally understand. I will never fill Maya's shoes. I was never meant to. Her legacy wasn't a title to be inherited. It was a task to be continued. She was a warrior who built a garden. I am a gardener who had to learn how to fight a flood. I didn't save our home with a gun, or a speech, or a grand alliance. I saved it with a microscope, a steady hand, and a memory. I have stepped out of her shadow, not by trying to escape it, but by finding my own way to cast a light. The ledger is still open. It always will be. But tonight, for the first time, I get to write an entry in my own hand. For 6 months, the Confluence breathed again. The Clearwater serum I managed to synthesize worked better than I could have ever hoped. The dust lung is now just a memory, a ghost we honor on the memorial wall. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly living up to my aunt's final words. We were building. The fear that had haunted our water was gone, and a current of optimism flowed in its place. I settled into my role. I wasn't the commander my Aunt Maya was. I was the town doctor, the head of research. My battles were fought against crop blight and septic infections. My victories were measured in successful harvests and healthy babies. The town trusted me. They saw me not as a leader who could win a war, but as a healer who had won the peace. We grew complacent, comfortable. The long peace, as the elders called it, had lasted a generation. We started to believe the worst of the old world was behind us, that the monsters were just stories we told our children to make them appreciate the light. But the old world doesn't forget. And its monsters have very long memories. It began as whispers from the hunting patrols. Strange tracks. Game vanishing from territories that had been safe for years. Leo, ever the vigilant guardian, wanted to double the perimeter guards and restrict all travel. I urged caution. Data, I told him. We need more data before we ration our resources and scare our people. I treated it like a clinical problem. Then, Patrol Beta 7 went missing. All 6 of them. 2 days later, one of them crawled back to us. His name was Jonah. He was delirious, bleeding from a dozen wounds. He didn't talk about a fight. He talked about a hunt. He said they were stalked for miles by something that was smart, something that laid traps. And he spoke of the sound. The clicking. A sound so dense, he said, it felt like the forest itself was chattering its teeth. A sound none of us had heard within 50 miles of the Confluence since I was a child. That night, Leo brought me the first concrete evidence. A body. One of ours. The wounds were savage, brutal. But what chilled me was the bite mark. It was unmistakable. Cordyceps. The plague that had broken the world was stirring at our gates. The community council was in an uproar. Panic is a disease far faster than any fungus. People demanded action. Leo presented a plan, a full defensive lockdown. Pull in all patrols, seal the gates, turn the Confluence into a fortress. We prepare for a siege, he said, his voice grim. It's the only way. I knew he was right, from a tactical standpoint. But a siege is a slow death. It means turning our home into a cage. In the lab, I found something that troubled me more than the thought of a simple horde. The fungal strain from the bite mark was different, more complex. The neural branching within the sample was denser, more organized than anything in our records. Even the records from the continuity bunker. This wasn't just a resurgence. It was an evolution. I had to understand. I went before the council. I told them that a wall would not save us if we didn't understand what was climbing over it. I argued against a passive defense. I needed to know what we were facing. I needed a live specimen. The room looked at me as if I had lost my mind. Leo was furious. You want me to send my people out to capture one of them? Anya, these aren't animals to be studied. They're monsters. Are they? I asked. Or are they a changing ecosystem we no longer understand? We beat the dust lung with science, not with guns. Let me use the weapons I know how to wield. It was the hardest argument of my life. I wasn't asking for soldiers. I was asking for researchers on the most dangerous field study imaginable. In the end, it was my record, my victory over the river poison, that won them over. They gave me their trust, a trust that felt heavier than any rifle. The mission was a waking nightmare. I was stationed at a forward observation post, a reinforced bunker 2 miles from the main gate, communicating with Leo over a secure channel. I watched through drone footage as his team moved through the woods. They weren't looking for a fight. They were using my research. We weren't tracking a single infected. We were tracking a pattern. My hypothesis was that this new horde was not a random mob. It was a coordinated body, a superorganism. And if it was, there had to be a nervous system. Lieutenants, alphas, a command structure. My goal wasn't to capture just any clicker. It was to capture one of the leaders. We saw it on the 3rd night. A pack of them. But one was different. Larger. The fungal plates on its head were shaped differently, like a crown, and it emitted a series of clicks that the others would immediately react to. It was directing them. That was our target. The fight to capture it was brutal and short. They used sonic lures and hydraulic nets, tech I designed. 2 of Leo's team were badly injured, but they got it. They got our specimen. Back in the lab, the true horror became clear. My hypothesis was right, but I had underestimated the scale of it. The creature in my cell wasn't just a leader. It was a transmitter, an amplifier. The unique fungal growth on its head acted like a biological antenna, receiving and boosting a signal from a source much farther away. It was being controlled. The entire horde was a puppet, and something unseen was pulling the strings. Through agonizingly careful analysis, we isolated the command frequency. It was a high-frequency sonic pulse, almost entirely outside the range of human hearing. It wasn't just one signal, it was a complex language of commands. Flank. Ambush. Wait. Attack. This was why they seemed so smart. They weren't. They were just following orders from a single, intelligent source. A prime infected. A queen. As we worked, the horde reached our valley. Thousands of them. A crimson tide of clicking death, moving with an eerie, unified purpose. Leo and the defense teams were ready for a last stand. But I had a different plan. We didn't need more bullets. We needed more silence. Leo stood beside me in the command center, his rifle in his hands, his eyes fixed on the approaching wave of monsters. "Are you sure about this, Anya?" he asked, his voice tight. "No," I answered honestly. "But it's the best chance we have." The horde was 200 yards from the wall. The clicking was a physical presence, a sound you could feel in your bones. The defenders braced for impact. I gave the order. Activate it. The emitters came to life, not with a boom, but with a deep, vibrating hum. They broadcasted our counter-frequency. A wave of pure, concentrated, sonic static, perfectly calibrated to overwhelm the command signal the horde was receiving. The effect was instantaneous and profoundly unsettling. The horde didn't die. It just stopped. The unified, terrifying charge dissolved into chaos. The clickers, suddenly deaf to their master's voice, became a confused mob. They turned on each other. They shambled aimlessly. Their complex flanking maneuvers became a clumsy, disorganized riot. They were no longer an army. They were just monsters again. Predictable. Manageable. The defenders opened fire, but the fight was different now. It wasn't a desperate last stand. It was a culling. I stood there, watching the chaos, and I felt a cold clarity settle over me. I had won. I had saved my people. I had proven that knowledge is the sharpest weapon we possess. But the war wasn't over. I hadn't killed the queen. I had just hung up the phone. I have finally, truly stepped out of Maya's shadow, only to find a much larger, darker one looming on the horizon. My name is Anya. I am the leader of the Confluence. I am a scientist, not a soldier. And I have just realized that my next mission is not to defend my home. It's to go out into the dark and hunt a god. Victory is a word for stories. In my experience, the moments after a battle are never victorious. They are just quiet. We won the fight for the valley. My sonic disruptor, Anya's lullaby, Leo has started calling it, with his grim sense of humor, worked. The horde, deafened to its master, devolved into a chaotic mob that our defenders could manage. But the quiet that followed was different. It wasn't the warm, hopeful quiet of the long peace. It was the silence of a held breath. We had survived a hurricane, but we all knew the storm that sent it was still raging somewhere over the horizon. We hadn't won a war. We had just survived a single battle. I spent the next week in my lab, analyzing the data, replaying the recordings of the Prime's command signal. The more I listened, the more my blood ran cold. It wasn't just a set of commands. There was a terrible, predatory intelligence to the patterns. It was testing our defenses, learning from our responses. It was thinking. I knew we couldn't just sit behind our walls and wait for it to find a new voice. A fortress is a tomb if you let it be. I went before the council. I told them we had to go on the offensive. Not with an army, but with an idea. My plan was simple. And completely insane. We couldn't find the Prime by looking for a single creature. It would be like trying to find one specific bird by searching an entire continent. But we could find it by tracking its voice. I proposed a mission to place 3 mobile sensor arrays in a wide triangle, deep in uninhabited territory. With 3 points of reference, we could triangulate the signal's origin. We could find its lair. We could put an X on the map. The council was terrified. They called it poking the beast. Leo stood by my side, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Anya, he told me in private, my job is to protect this place, to protect you. You want us to walk out into the dark, searching for the heart of it. If a patient has a tumor, Leo, I replied, You don't treat the fever and ignore the disease. You find the source. This is no different. He didn't agree, not really. But he was loyal to my aunt's memory, and therefore to me. He agreed to lead my security escort. The team would be just 3. Me to run the science. Leo to keep us alive. And a young engineer named Javier, the only other person in the Confluence who truly understood the complexities of the sonic technology. He was brilliant, and he saw the mission as the greatest scientific challenge of his life. He didn't have Leo's fear. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. Leaving the safety of the walls felt like stepping off a cliff into a fog. The world was different now. The mindless, shambling infected we were used to were still there, but they were lost. They wandered aimlessly, like puppets with their strings cut. It wasn't less dangerous. It was just unpredictable. There was no pattern to avoid, no logic to their migration. Just random, lethal encounters in the ruins of the old world. Our first objective was a derelict radio tower 60 miles to the east, perched on a rocky hill. It was the perfect place to deploy the first sensor array. The journey was a tense crawl. We moved by day, hid by night. Leo was in his element, his senses tuned to the slightest sound, the slightest unnatural movement. Javier was fascinated by everything, constantly taking readings, analyzing spore counts, his scientific curiosity warring with the primal fear of the wilds. And I was the bridge between them. My mind was on the mission, my eyes on the data, but my heart was in my throat with every snapped twig. We reached the tower on the 4th day. Securing it was a quiet, brutal affair. A small nest of runners had taken up residence in the base. Leo and his knife handled it with a grim efficiency that made Javier turn pale. We spent the next 6 hours setting up the first array. The equipment was delicate, sensitive. As we powered it on, my terminal came to life. And I heard it. Not with my ears, but as a cascade of data on my screen. The Prime's signal. Without the interference from the local horde, it was terrifyingly clear. A low, constant hum of predatory intelligence. A will that stretched for miles, expressed as a silent, unwavering frequency. It was like reading the mind of a god. And it was pure, patient, malevolent hunger. We got our bearing. The first piece of the puzzle. The signal was strong, coming from somewhere far to the north. We packed up and moved on, the weight of that silent scream now a permanent passenger on our journey. The vector from the first array led us into a valley that didn't appear on any of our maps. The air grew still and humid. A faint, sweet, cloying smell filled the air. And the ground was alive. Strange, fungal stalks, thick as a person's arm, pulsed with a faint, bioluminescent light. They grew in neatly spaced rows, like crops in a field. And at the base of each stalk, half buried in the earth, was the body of an infected. Runners, stalkers, even a few clickers. Their bodies weren't dead, not entirely. They were rooted. Their chests rose and fell with a shallow, rhythmic breath. The fungus had integrated with their nervous systems, turning them into living batteries. Biological repeaters. My God. I stopped in my tracks, my mind reeling. It wasn't just controlling the mobile, infected. It was terraforming. It was building an infrastructure. A network. This wasn't a nest. It was a farm. An orchard grown to amplify its psychic voice. Javier was captivated, moving forward to take readings. Leo was screaming at him to get back. But it was too late. The moment we stepped into the orchard, the stalks around us began to pulse faster. A localized version of the command signal washed over us, a disorienting wave of psychic pressure. And the rooted infected began to stir, tearing themselves from the earth with a sound of ripping flesh. The trap was sprung. The fight was a panicked, desperate retreat. These things were weak, but they were everywhere. We were fighting our way out of living, thinking ground. Javier went down, a piece of shrapnel from a ricochet tearing through his leg. Leo threw him over his shoulder, providing cover fire while I grabbed what I could, a sample of the pulsating stalks. We made it out, but Javier was hurt badly. We had blundered into the tyrant's own garden, and it had exacted its toll. We couldn't go on to the third beacon. Javier's leg was getting infected. We were low on supplies. But I had to get the second reading. We set up the array on the ridge, overlooking the horrifying orchard. As the data came in, I plotted the second vector. The two lines on my map crossed. Far to the north. Deep in the heart of the Cascade Range, in a region marked on old maps as a national park, but now just a blank space of deep wilderness. There it was. Not a vague direction anymore. A destination. A kill box. The lair of the beast. I looked at Javier, his face pale with pain. I looked at Leo, his eyes hard, already planning our retreat. The scientist in me wanted to push on, to get the final, perfect data point. But the leader in me, the one my aunt would have recognized, knew the cost. The ledger. I made the call. We're going home, I said. We returned to the Confluence not as conquering heroes, but as wounded survivors carrying a terrible new truth. I stand before the council map now. A single, red X marks a spot on the world. The home of our enemy. I went out there to hunt a monster. But what I found was so much more. A rival intelligence. A force that is not just surviving, but actively reshaping the world in its own image. This isn't about just protecting our walls anymore. This is about fighting for the right of humanity to even exist on a planet that may have already chosen its successor. My name is Anya. I am the leader of the Confluence. I am a scientist. And I have just drawn a map that will lead us to the gates of hell. The next mission is no longer a hunt. It will be an exorcism.